Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Nugget Climbing Podcast. This is your host, Stephen Dimmitt. My friend Matt Heyliger is back on the podcast today. This is a follow-up episode. The way that follow-ups work is these are bonus episodes that are available for patrons who support the Nugget Climbing Podcast for $5 per month or more on Patreon. I'm going to give you a free teaser here today. That's what you're listening to right now. And the full version is available right now if you sign up for Patreon for $5 per month. You'll get access to all of the follow-ups that I've done, close to 50 of them, with more coming all the time. And you also get ad-free episodes for the regular podcast and more goodies. You can check out all of that and learn more at patreon.com/thenuggetclimbing. But yeah, so today's episode is really just an update on me with some really great input from Matt along the way. I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast here and there, but I had a pretty serious injury back in December right after getting to Waco Tanks. I partially tore my bicep tendon in my right arm. It ended up being a grade 2 tear, which we explain in more detail in this episode. But yeah, I've talked about it a little bit here and there. I've alluded to it, but I haven't shared the full story. So this episode is my full story of my injury and how I rehabbed it and was able to get back to 100% within a few months. Matt was a huge part of that. I mean, the key part of that. He is such a good physical therapist, and he helped me through all of the steps. And he's been especially helpful with that last phase of recovering from an injury, which is how do I get back to my sport? How do I get back to climbing hard and getting back to doing the thing that I loved and even doing the thing that hurt me in the first place with confidence and not being afraid that I'm going to injure myself again. So that's what we talked about in this episode. The full version is about an hour and a half long. I talked about the injury, how it happened, what my rehab looked like. Matt chimed in all over the place and shared his professional expertise and provided a lot more context and information. And then we talked about my current training. I'm actually in St. George, Utah right now, training for an upcoming bouldering trip. My plans have totally changed for this spring and summer. I'm super excited. I'm going on a big international trip to Magic Wood in Switzerland and Rocklands, starting in May and lasting a few months. And so for the last month or so, I've been training mostly in the gym for that trip and also really trying to make sure that this injury is beyond 100%, that my bicep tendons are stronger than before and that I don't have to worry about getting re-injured on the trip. So that's what you can expect from today's follow-up episode. I talked about my goals for the trip and my goal to climb V12 by the end of the year as well. But we sat down to record this hoping that it would be helpful. So if you are someone who has had injuries or is currently injured, I hope you're not, but if you are and you just need a little bit of hope and you're curious how that process works and what to expect, hopefully my success story and sharing the different pieces of it will help you out on your own journey to recovery. So yeah, here's the free teaser, and like I said, the full version is out now if you want to hear the full thing. All right, enjoy the teaser. All right, everything's recording.
Okay.
We're doing it.
That was really simple.
Yeah. Half an hour later, the first time using the cameras, first time using the mic stands, but not first time talking to you. So that makes things a little easier. Yeah. I was thinking about it, just like on my walk just now. We can talk about that, but I think you're one of just a few people that I've recorded with in person twice. So I've done quite a few in-person interviews and a handful of in-person follow-ups, but very few people have been in person for both. Nice. Initial and then a follow-up episode. Nice. I think like you and Will Woodward and Jonathan, I was able to do a couple with him, but he's also done some remote ones. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what the difference feels like, you know?
Yeah. It's always nice to just sit and talk with somebody. It always feels a little bit more laid back. Yeah. Real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've been hanging out this week, which has been cool.
Yeah.
not the first go around.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we should start by filling in some context for people. I have no notes aside from, I'm looking at my computer right now, but I'm looking at my training calendar for Waco because we're going to talk about my my injury back in December. But for people that are tuning in, you and I did a first interview, a first podcast episode. I think we recorded that early October, late September.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 6 months ago, we're recording this one right at the end of March, and we were in Ten Sleep, Wyoming for that one in the van, sport climbing trip, and we talked a lot about. You were helping me. It was a physical therapy focused episode, but we were talking about carpal tunnel because that's something I have struggled with for a long time, and that had kind of flared up for me. It tends to flare up more with sport climbing, specifically with low angle, crimpy, small holds, sport climbing.
Yeah.
So
we haven't even talked about that much this time around. So,
totally. Yeah.
It's been somewhat dormant.
It's been somewhat dormant. I mean, I think there's 2 exercises that you gave me then that I haven't been super diligent with. That sounds like maybe they're like key ones that I should keep working with to keep that stuff at bay. And there's other maybe follow-on effects from those areas too. But yeah, so we talked about the carpal tunnel, and then went our separate ways for a while. And then I went down to Waco and promptly got injured. And so you've been super helpful. I'm back to 100%. Thankfully, it was my right bicep tendon. But yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about what happened, my injury, how I rehabbed it, and any knowledge or just any perspective that you have to share on it for people, just to give them the context and then hopefully help them figure out what's going on with them if they have injuries and the best path forward if they just had an injury or they have something nagging or whatever it is. So
yeah, and it's been a super fun process, like getting to go with you from basically day one. Like, I'm sure you're going to talk about the timeline, but like hitting the ground and like being like, okay, like we got to get this guy better fast because he's psyched, but he also wants to do it right. And so it was fun. Just like you'll give context with the weekly calls and the consistency with the check-in and just the whole commitment on your end was awesome and yielded like V10 at week 8, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll have to kind of look at my notes and crunch the numbers, but that's about right. That's definitely close.
Yeah.
I think that is right. Yeah, within 2 months, which I'm obviously super happy with. And now to be back at 100% less than 4 months. I've been back at 100%, I think, as far as that injury goes for at least a month now. So
yeah,
took 3 months maybe for full recovery. But I want this episode to kind of be a catch up for people. What I've been up to lately, the injury, because I've talked about it here and there and kind of mentioned it, but I haven't spelled out exactly what happened in the whole timeline. I'm sure people are curious about that. And then, because I did that follow-up series with Jesse, we recorded all of those we basically batched them and recorded them in like a 2-week span in early January. My own personal climbing plans and training plans have completely shifted from then. We're out here in St. George right now. I'm not sport climbing very much. I'm mostly in the gym training, bouldering. I've got a really exciting bouldering trip coming up to Switzerland and South Africa that I haven't talked about much. So we can talk about just my updated plans and then how I think the thing that doesn't get talked about a lot with injuries is, first, what do you do? But then I think the hard part is, or one of the hard parts is when you get back to basically being 100% or you're close, what do you do next? How do you go from rehab to just training?
Sure.
How do you go from, okay, I can go back to my normal activity to let's make sure this never happens again and get it stronger than ever? That's kind of where my head's at right now with my own training plan. So
yeah,
anyway,
and that's a fun part of the process. That's like I think one of the cornerstones I'm trying to create with my business is just being able to have that expertise to help transition athletes toward the tail end of injuries and out of injuries into training again, and then helping them find that path forward. And a lot of the folks that have reached out in the last 6 months specifically have kind of been in that zone where they've had nagging things. Not so much acute like yours, but things that have been present for a while, and they were really curious on like getting past those and finding a path forward, which with oftentimes it's a new path with training incorporated with, maybe some rehab activities as well.
Yeah, like a tendonitis or tendinosis or nagging shoulder thing.
Yeah, lots of the osises.
The osises.
Yeah, and lots of shoulders, which I love shoulders. So,
complicated shoulders, lots of stuff going on in there.
Lots of stuff.
There's just so many things. Yeah. Well, cool. Should I just tell people exactly what happened with the injury?
Yeah, and it's kind of fun for me to walk back through this with you too, because I listen to the show and I just keep picking at episodes, and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh wow, we're like back here in timeline, and like I'm 6 weeks ahead with you, and listening to that has been kind of fun, just like jumping all over the place. But like I think like getting it all out in series would be really good for your listeners and folks to know like what you went through and the path forward.
Because it gets confusing. I like generally publish things in chronological order, but with the follow-ups, those are typically a much quicker turnaround. Like I record them, publish them within a few weeks.
Nice.
So that for people that listen to everything, that really like screws with the timeline.
Right,
and
like
I'm just like time traveling all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's go back to December, and I'll just tell people exactly what happened with the injury, and just in case they're curious, and also because I think there's a really key lesson for me that I'll be thinking about on future climbing trips, because I think this was a very preventable injury. So I was in St. George at the very beginning of December, having just come back from Thanksgiving week in Washington with family, and had a couple days at the climbing gym. Stopped through Durango, interviewed Luke Mihal, came down to Waco. So my first climbing day in Waco was December 6th. And I went straight to the Martini Cave and immediately started trying Martini Right, which is a V12. That was going to be my big goal for the trip. A super audacious goal for me. So I was kind of expecting to just like siege it and put a lot of time in. Kind of crazy to show up in a place and immediately jump on V12, but it's a very long boulder. It's basically 4 boulders in one. It's like 22 moves or something. The breakdown, more or less, I've heard a number of things, but in my opinion, the breakdown's like a V8 straight into like a V10, straight into like a V8 or 7, straight into a V7, with no rests. So I picked the intro boulder, which is like a V8 section on pretty good holds, thinking, okay, it's finger friendly at least. I've been climbing. It's not like I was off the couch, so like my body should be able to handle burly moves, and I'll kind of like ease into the season by focusing on the easier sections of the climb. And usually like showing up somewhere and trying V8 my first day is like pretty reasonable. So that wasn't so much of a problem. But that first session, warmed up pretty quickly in the cave and just raged on that first boulder problem for a few hours, and then took a rest day. And then I think it had rained a little bit, and so I hadn't intended to come back to the cave, but it was dry, and I was psyched. And so I came back to the cave 2 days later, worked on the third section of the boulder, which is that like V7 or 8 section. And so I was working on a different section, similar difficulty, decent holds. But where I went wrong is that the thing that makes the first boulder hard is very, very similar to the thing that makes the third boulder hard. So you're really stretched out on a horizontal roof with your right arm extended on a really good kind of undercling, but with an insane amount of tension. And then both of those boulders have like a hard kind of fall-in move. The one that I hurt myself on, you're actually like hand-foot matched, and you fall in and catch yourself and then come in and match. The other one, you're just holding a lot of tension to walk the feet through, but your hand is pronated, your right arm's pronated, almost fully extended, and then really supinated. Yeah, supinated. That's why you're here. and then
be in the background here to like correct the biomechanics. Yeah, you're doing great, dude.
Supinated, and then just holding an insane amount of tension at like the slightly flexed, maybe, I don't know, 20 degrees of flexion, or we'd call that like 160 or 140, or
it was closer to straight, like
closer to straight
again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, on that second climbing day, my third day in Waco, I was trying that section, trying that fall-in move over and over. Felt fine. I maybe had a little bit of like tendinitis-y symptoms warming up, but nothing crazy. And then just one of those tries, heard like a in my elbow, like right in here, with the biceps tendon, and just immediately dropped off and was just like, oh, what just happened? That sort of thing, just waiting to kind of know how bad it was.
Yeah.
And took a long walk.
Wasn't it? Oh no.
Oh no.
It sounded like
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Oh no. You can see my eyes really wide, just staring into the middle distance, doing like a self-screening. So Yeah, that was December 8th. That was when I partially tore my right bicep tendon. And there is a video of this. I will link to it. It's, if you don't like seeing this sort of stuff, because you can hear it, then skip it. Don't watch it. But if you're curious, you can actually see the injury happen on my Instagram. So I'll link to that for people that are curious. But
how many times did you make that move that day?
That day, probably 7 or 8.
7 or 8,
mm-hmm. And I had tried that similar move many times 2 days before. So I think in hindsight, it was just a very acute tissue overload, way too much stimulus of the same exact thing. Should have had more, I probably could have tried gone pretty hard on 2 burly V8s with a rest day in between.
Change the angle.
But change the style, change the what makes it the crux and things like that. So that's where I went wrong in hindsight.
Yeah.
But hindsight's 20/20. It's hard to
totally. We learn from these things sometimes.
I know. But so I think pretty immediately I reached out to you and Tyler Nelson. Tyler was pretty sure it was a bicep tendon tear. I didn't have a session with him, so he didn't have any opinions on how severe it was or anything. And then you had a bunch of bandwidth, and I really like working with you, and so we just hit the ground running. Do you remember our first call, or where would you start with after something like this?
I remember. I think it was a text, evening, and a video that came through with the text. And I remember it was right before
this just happened.
This just happened. I was like, oh, damn it. I want to get back to this guy right away. So, I think we connected that night, and we decided the next day or the day after, I can't remember which one of those worked for a call. I think we had a call within 48 hours, a couple days later. But
it says started PT on the 12th. So that was probably just movement.
Oh, we got you through the weekend. Yeah, we had a conversation, and then we got you through the weekend, and then we had an actual call.
Can you go a little closer with this?
Directly, yeah.
You can scoot it towards you.
Bring this guy in.
Nice.
Cool. There's a lot of equipment in here this time. I'm convinced I'm going to break something. It's a lot of nice equipment too. Nice not holding the mic though.
Right? I know. I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
You talk like this.
You talk with your hands. Yeah, you're on video. Demonstrate all the moves.
Yeah, it's great for beta.
Yeah,
for a podcast. Yeah. Anyway,
right off the bat, I think I just kind of reviewed your notes too, but you had enough swelling to not be able to see your veins on the one arm versus the other arm. But there was no immediate bruising. There was some loss of range of motion. Both flexion and extension were limited at end ranges of motion. And just in terms of people listening and trying to figure out severity of injuries, when you have loss of motion and you have enough inflammation to be noting inflammation in the arm, it's likely more than just a couple-day recovery. It's likely something that you need to take a little bit more seriously. There's grades to injuries, and they're really hard to specifically grade. Grade 1, 2, and 3 would be mild tissue damage, moderate tissue damage, and then a rupture. And there's some other grading scales that have been created, but that's the most general one, specifically for tearing a muscle or tearing a tendon. And to assess you remotely and look at kind of mobility restrictions and then the course of recovery, we were is it a grade 1? Is it a grade 2? Likely there was enough tissue damage to classify it as a grade 2. There was loss of motion for up to a couple of weeks as we slowly started to integrate more mobility exercises. And we did a lot of things like ice and then ice and heat contrast right off the bat, as much as you had access to it. And then
I was bringing a bucket of ice water into my friend's hot tub. Just dunking my elbow and then going back in the hot tub. It's funny. Actually, I remember the first couple of sessions, it was so cold and windy outside. I would just stick my arm up like this. It was perfect.
Call that good. Numb it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember you calling it a grade 1+.
Well, yeah, that's funny. I had a feeling you were going to ask that question.
Yeah.
And I think that was to more give you confidence in the moment.
Okay.
that you wouldn't go down the rabbit hole of a grade 2 and just be like, oh man, well that means the severity and.
Oh, interesting. So you think it was more of a 2?
Yeah. I mean, I was on the fence, and again, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Like what matters is getting mobility back, finding the level that you can start loading the injury appropriately, and having that be a really graduated process based on some stuff we'll talk about in terms of pain guidelines. But yeah, it was right in between early on. And I just felt like in your situation, it would be better not to walk you down the rabbit hole of thinking that the injury was more severe than it likely was.
Okay.
And, I wanted you to protect it, but I also wanted you to be able to get back to doing general mobility and not feeling like you had to completely stay off of it. Because from everything we saw, when we started looking at the pain parameters of starting to do isometric loading, like you tolerated it quite well as long as you stayed within a certain load intensity, basically.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean,
yeah,
the O1 Plus doesn't really exist. It was more just a thing I was like,
not that big a deal, man.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
No, that's actually really, that's even more, in hindsight, that's kind of more encouraging or just cool that it's like, oh, it's a pretty serious injury and back to 100% and climbing V10 in Waco within 3 months.
Yeah. And that said, I didn't like tee you up in terms of your timeline being different. Like we were thinking it would be a 6 to 8 week heal if everything went really well and you followed all the guidelines and there wasn't any significant re-aggravations along the way, which is certainly something that generally people have a hard time self-regulating, like in terms of having an experience like going out, reloading the tissue. What was the response? Oh, I kind of lost range of motion a little bit. What does that mean? And that's where having guidance from somebody who's been through a lot of that before, I think can be really beneficial for folks, is just knowing when you can nudge it and when you can't. And that's so hard to know, like being honest with yourself. Like me, myself personally, being honest about my injuries over the years has been challenging. Like coming out of, I had a surgery this fall and I actually, I'm really grateful to Esther Smith. She's an awesome physical therapist, now lives in Bozeman where I used to live. And we worked together a little bit in person, a little bit remotely, but it was just really nice to have guidelines set for my stages of rehabilitation. I didn't get to be my own coach, my own physical therapist. A lot of people have asked that too. It's like a lot of the clients I work with, I'll talk about that and they're like, don't you know everything? Like, don't you? I'm like, no, it's way too hard to, if you can give information to somebody else, you start to hear yourself carve a narrative toward what you want, like your expectation and what you really want, like how to get toward your goal. And oftentimes it's hard to hit the brakes enough.
I see.
I think that personally through my last rehabilitation versus the one before, this was the second tear on an inguinal hernia, which is no fun and is also not that bad in terms of surgeries. But it's really nice to have guidance now that I've seen that process going alone and going with somebody who I really respect. So
I'm smiling because we were climbing together a couple days ago, and I just found out like months later that when we were in 10 sleep, you were like stopping 20 times a pitch and like poking your hernia back in through your stomach lining, which is amazing.
Totally. It makes a great joke now, but literally it would be like,
I had no clue.
Make a couple of moves, kind of shake out a little bit, figure out an awkward position that I could like tuck my guts back in, chalk up, make a few more moves, and then like repeat that process. And just being on the rock a little bit here, granted I don't have much fitness in terms of endurance, but man, it's nice not to have to do that. Like it's definitely an efficiency point and a confidence point too. Like just
saving
not
a lot of moves.
Yeah. And just like the mental energy that was going into pulling that off and like hoping it was okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for all that. I think I'm going to share a little bit about my subjective experience when the injury happened, just to give more context to that grade 2 or whatever the injury was. It was weird. I mean, I knew, I heard it and I felt it like inside my elbow. I was like, oh, like something just either tore or like shifted really significantly. It was a visceral, like, like shift or tear or something. But it didn't hurt really, just probably your body's flooded with adrenaline and you're just sitting there like, what just happened? But I took off my climbing shoes, went on a walk and just kind of kept moving it. And I could kind of tell like it didn't hurt, but like something definitely happened. It doesn't feel normal. It feels weird to straighten my arm all the way. I can do it. I can bend it and flex it, but it just feels kind of off. But I walked around for maybe 30 minutes and was like, it doesn't hurt. So I walked back to the cave and my pads were all still there. when I just kind of like chalked my hands up and just like stood on the ground and felt some holds. Because I thought like maybe that wasn't, maybe it's okay. And like maybe that wasn't an injury. I don't really know yet. As soon as I tried to very gently like compress 2 jugs, standing on the ground with my feet on the ground, it was like, oop, nope, can't do that.
Not happening.
Yeah, it was just like definitely cannot load that arm at all. So that was where it was at. I mean, I could do basic things. I think over the next few days, I really did have to baby it a lot. And I remember it was kind of notable when I could like pick up my pot of water for coffee and pour
all the
coffee.
small wins that you were getting early on. It was like you would show up for an appointment and be like, dude, I can I can lift something.
Yeah. So I really couldn't do anything for the first maybe just 5 days or something like that. So yeah, that's what it wasn't a rupture. I knew it wasn't a rupture. My bicep didn't ball up into my shoulder or anything like that, but it was
obvious.
Definitely like something just happened and I definitely cannot climb anymore.
Yeah.
And kind of had to like awkwardly one-armedly get all my pads and stuff together to get out of there that day. But yeah, it didn't hurt. It was just kind of like, oh man, what happened? Yeah, I don't really know. So
yeah. And then the soreness the following morning was a little bit more notable for sure. Yeah. Which is very typical. I mean, you've got the adrenaline in the situation that kind of masks things to a certain point. A lot of us like our internal dialogue immediately doesn't want to feel significant injury, there's especially if you can walk out, like if you're not able to weight bear on some sort of ankle injury or fracture, that's a different story. But
yeah, the denial thing's interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Like our brain does amazing things in terms of masking pain or perceptions of pain. We talked about a little bit of that in our first talk, but this is kind of the other end of that, more of like the I don't want this to be a horrible thing, a really big setback. And I personally have had a bunch of experiences like that, just like an initial like small little finger tweak. And, you as much as you shouldn't load it, you also want to like just go test it and just go figure out what is the severity. Is it really that bad? And every time you do that, it's essentially a little bit of a setback, versus like if something feels significant and you just immediately just leave it alone. Yeah. Like we actually had you, hadn't thought of this until now, but like you made a sling out of a grocery bag. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I wonder if I have any photos of that. I think I do. I made a sling out of a natural grocer's shopping bag.
Yeah.
Just like hooked one strap around my neck and then awkwardly put myself in the grocery bag with my arm. And then I guess just put the other sling. I mean, it worked pretty easily.
It was like both right over the head and you just kind of hooked it in.
Looked ridiculous, but it did the job. And I didn't have to do that for very long. That was really just the first week, I think, or so.
Yep. Yeah. And in that situation, you're leaving in this case, the bicep's going to be shortened. It's not put on tension. So the lengthening of the tissue in the bicep occurs when you go into full straightening of the elbow, full extension. So here we're just basically trying to put it in a position of tissue slack so that there isn't a little tug on the injury that's constantly there. And even with your arm down by your side, that would be different. But you can lose range of motion. Like you started to lose your extension range of motion because we were basically keeping you out of that position. So,
but that's okay.
Yeah, in this situation, it's something that we'd rather go get back later than to just force it in order to keep full range of motion and compromise whatever tissue healing's occurring. So your body is already going into processes where you're trying to lay down essentially scar tissue. And then the processes in the coming weeks are remodeling that scar tissue. And every time you go and you tug on it, and, the pain doesn't necessarily equate to the amount of tissue damage at that point, but it is still a really good parameter to watch out for. So, slowly regaining range of motion and not trying to just yank on the tissue in order to reestablish range of motion in full in this situation is good. In other situations, like if you're talking about somebody with a knee injury and they're walking with a really abnormal gait, that could be different, where you'd want to establish normal gait patterns as soon as possible. And that may take being a little bit more aggressive with the joint mobilizations or whatever you need to do to restore tissue capacity and mobility.
Okay.
So it varies by the joint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm going to give people the next few days of timeline here. So the injury happened on December 8th. That was a Thursday. And I think I talked to you shortly after that, and I think we just texted and had an appointment, maybe set up for Monday or something. And you just encouraged me to take 72 hours full rest. So I did nothing, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then in my notes here, I have for that next Monday, so 4 days out, rest, started PT. And I think at that point, PT was just like using the range of motion a little bit, like not holding any weight, just kind of moving the arm a little bit very gently. We can talk more about the specifics there. So a couple days of that, and then it was, the next Wednesday, so the 14th, almost a week from the injury, that I started doing gentle finger loading with my Tendon. So with an arm straight, I was doing some of that Tyler Nelson active flexion, trying to bend my fingers down into a half crimp and then into a full crimp, but just going really easy, making sure I was feeling no pain in the elbow, and then doing elbow rehab as well. Did that, it looks like a couple times a week, but I think you had told me at least 10 days of rest without any sort of climbing.
Yeah, 10 days I think we were looking at like a 10-day, 2-week window, depending on how things responded and depending if we were getting full range of motion restored. And you can think of that a little bit like walking. Like we don't want to send somebody out if they can't fully bend or straighten their elbow to start loading, because the tissue is going to be working then, and we're going to be contracting that tissue. And that can limit your ability to go regain, especially end ranges of motion into extension, if we're spending a lot of time hyperflexed and engaged. So I believe at that point, I'm looking at my notes too here, you had gained full range of motion. We turned you loose on doing those. I think this is an interesting thing to talk about, the Tyler Nelson active loading, the overcoming isometrics. Just because you were able to pull it off without actually engaging the bicep. So by setting it up just perfectly and just recruiting through your fingers and not actually recruiting through your shoulder or arm at all, you were able to probably preserve some muscular strength there. And recruitment.
If I remember, I'm looking at my notes actually, I think like day one of doing that, so I had my arm at my side with my elbow straight, a sling around my foot, and I was just like pulling active flexion on the block with the Tendon. I was able to go to like 70 or 80% of max without any pain in my elbow, which is plenty to keep your fingers
totally
at least maintain their strength.
So,
so yeah, that was
going to
really
limit
cool
some losses for sure.
Cool to see. Yeah.
Yep. And I have in that week, the following week we started to go into isometrics. Is probably what you're going to touch on next.
So my first day in the climbing gym and loading was on the 20th. So that was almost 2 weeks. It was like 12 days after the injury.
Yep.
And I climbed for about an hour or an hour and a half up to V4 with lots of rest between tries. Yeah, I remember that. So I was climbing exclusively on vertical slab and maybe up to like 5 or 10 degrees overhanging.
Yep.
And just kind of testing it. And I would do something like do a V2 and then come down and like, okay, how do I feel? And give it 3 or 4 minutes to make sure that there was no lagging or lasting discomfort or pain. Make sure it came right back down to baseline before I tried the next problem. Okay. And just happened to be able to go up to about V4. And that wasn't something we had decided. It was just kind of like, stay within that pain, that 2 out of 10 pain threshold. And I was able to go up to about V4 on like the techie, fingery, but not muscly stuff. And then started loading that day 2. PT loading day 2. Yeah, it looks like really simple, just some isometric loading. Isotonic loading, full range curls, 3 sets in neutral with 5 pounds, 10 reps with 5 pounds. So neutral's this, right? So
we called neutral. So if we've got full supination and full pronation, we're right in between. So if you're standing, thumb would be facing
Is that forward. Like a hammer curl?
Kind of a hammer curl.
Okay.
Yeah.
So doing hammer curls with 5 pounds, just super, super easy, and doing 3 sets of 10. And then doing some isometric bar pulls where I believe I had my feet on the ground. It was just gently pulling down on a pull-up bar.
Yep.
In an overhand grip.
And we tested all of those out basically to find the grip that was the most comfortable in each position. So we were looking at joint angles, so how much flexion or extension. For the isometrics, what was well tolerated, and the position in terms of hand position. So biceps, technically, like if you're supinated, is going to create the most force and load generated on the biceps versus if you're palm down. Another muscle, the brachialis, is more of a dominant muscle there. So we just biased to whatever was the least painful, and it just happened to be that hammer position was the least painful of the three.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm realizing I don't want to go through my entire calendar here
because he took really good notes.
People's eyes are probably glazing over.
Good notes too. So
let's just talk about like the different stages of recovery. So obviously tissue healing at the very beginning and taking that rest is important. But if you could expand on why and how to know how long, and then what comes next, and what we kind of progress through as far as the different stages, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the general breakdown: acute, subacute, and then it's either called functional or chronic, or like that last stage of healing has a few different names. In terms of
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed that free teaser of my follow-up episode with Matt Heyliger. The full version is out right now for patrons who support the Nugget Climbing Podcast for $5 per month or more. You get tons of goodies, you get tons of bonus episodes, as well as ad-free episodes and uncut video interviews. There's so much good stuff over there on Patreon. You can learn more at patreon.com/thenuggetclimbing. It takes just a few minutes to sign up, and you can cancel at any time. No questions asked. Super easy. All right. I appreciate you guys for tuning in today. Hope you're all healthy or on the path to health and recovery if you are dealing with an injury. Matt's awesome. I can't recommend him highly enough if you want to work with him. We shared his contact info and how to get in touch with him in the full episode. You can also find him at mattheyliger.com. I'll put a link to his website right there if you scroll down in your podcast app. He would love to work with you. And if you found this episode helpful, I would love your support on Patreon. So again, all the things right there. If you scroll down in your podcast app, thanks again for listening. Hope you're all well, enjoying your climbing, and we will see you next time.
Move with the rhythm, shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.